In the glass rooftop of a museum, where orchids glistened under rain-streaked light, no one expected the night to shatter. The guests saw a scarred young woman standing alone, the daughter of one of the city's most powerful CEOs, a figure whispered about, pitied, and ignored. Then something impossible happened. A single dad waiter, balancing champagne minutes earlier, stepped out of the shadows. Instead of turning away from her scars, he placed a battered metronome on the table, its pendulum ticking steady. And in front of cameras and a stunned crowd, he invited her to dance. What followed would not only break her silence after 7 years, it would unravel a corporate empire, expose buried lies, and create a legacy of healing that no one saw coming. The rain had been falling since afternoon, a thin, steady sheet that turned the city into a watercolor of muted neon and blurred streetlights. On the rooftop of the Metropolitan Museum, a glasshouse stretched like a cathedral of steel and light, its transparent walls beaded with water. Inside, the Anderson Foundation was hosting its annual benefit for burn survivors. Guests in black tie attire drifted between palm fronds and orchids arranged in symmetrical patterns, champagne glasses glowing golden under pendant lamps. For most, it was another night of influence, a place where donations were as much about reputation as they were about compassion. For Ethan Carter, it was just another shift. At 36, Ethan had become adept at invisibility. His pressed black uniform marked him as staff, not guest. He moved through the crowd balancing silver trays of sparkling wine with one hand, keeping his posture steady as conversations of market forecasts and political influence floated around him. To the guests, he was part of the scenery, reliable, forgettable. But behind the mask of professionalism was a man who had learned steadiness the hard way. 3 years earlier, while his wife Amanda fought through chemo, Ethan had discovered that rhythm could hold someone together when words could not. He had tapped gentle beats on her wrist during panic attacks, breathed with her through cycles of 4 counts in, 4 counts held, 6 counts out. After she died, those rhythms became his anchor. They were also what he used to soothe his daughter Lily, now 7, when grief made her small chest heave in silent sobs. Tonight, his body moved with the same economy of rhythm, serving drinks, dodging elbows, carrying plates, while his mind remained alert to anything that wavered out of tempo. Near the far end of the glasshouse, just beyond a curtain of ferns, he noticed her, Sophia Anderson. 24 years old, daughter of Clara Anderson, the formidable CEO who presided over this entire event like a queen in her own conservatory. Sophia had attended in compliance, not choice. A long dress of silver blue clung softly to her frame, its collar high enough to cover her right jawline, though not high enough to conceal the scars etched into her skin. Fire had kissed her 7 years ago, and the world had not let her forget it. Her mother's empire managed hospitals and research labs, but no amount of money could erase the melted map of trauma across Sophia's face. She stood apart, half hidden behind a column of glass panels streaked with rain, eyes lowered, hands trembling slightly as she clutched an untouched flute of sparkling cider. Guests glanced her way, then glanced away again, the polite cruelty of high society. Ethan saw the tremor before anyone else. The glass in her hand quivered, a barely perceptible vibration that he recognized not as weakness, but as the body's revolt against memory. He knew that tremor. He had seen it in Amanda when the scent of disinfectant dragged her back to hospital wards, seen it in Lily when thunder cracked like gunfire through their thin apartment walls. Trauma had its own metronome, and it never asked permission to play. He adjusted the tray on his palm and, without calculation, moved closer. Not directly, he stopped at a side table, set the tray down, and lingered as though checking placements. Then, in a gesture small enough to be overlooked by the glittering crowd, he lifted his left hand, placed 2 fingers against the back of his own right wrist, and tapped a steady rhythm. 4 taps, pause, 4 taps, pause, 6 taps. Box breathing without words. When Sophia's eyes flicked up, startled, She caught him looking, not pitying, not intrusive, simply steady. He let the rhythm continue against his own skin, offering a silent invitation across the space. Her breathing hitched, then slowed almost imperceptibly to match. The tremor in her hand lessened. For a moment, the glass didn't shake. The string quartet in the corner shifted into a slow adagio. It wasn't the waltz of gilded galas, but something gentler minor chords brushed with melancholy. Ethan inclined his head slightly, stepped forward one pace, and extended his free hand, palm open in the universal gesture of dance. It was not the theatrical bow of a ballroom dancer, more the quiet reach of someone offering to guide without controlling. Sophia blinked. For 7 years, every instinct had been to retreat, to vanish before stares turned to whispers. Yet here was a stranger in a black uniform, not a guest but a server, treating her as though she were not ruined, but simply someone who could move to music, her lips parted, a protest caught between them. She glanced sideways toward the crowd. Most were absorbed in conversation, unaware. But across the room, her mother Clara saw everything. The CEO's gaze sharpened like glass. Sophia's shoulders tensed, ready to refuse. Then Ethan shifted his gesture. Instead of insisting, he withdrew the hand, reached into his pocket, and produced a small metronome the size of a matchbox, its wood scarred, brass dial dulled by years of use. He flicked the switch and muffled it in his palm so that only he and Sophia could see the faint vibration. He set it on the table between them, the little pendulum swaying silently but visibly. Steady, not perfect. His eyes held hers. This wasn't about a public dance. It was about anchoring. Sophia exhaled slowly. She placed her glass on the table, fingers trembling but deliberate, and took one tentative step toward him. Not into the center of the glass house, but into the narrow corridor between ferns where the light was softer. She didn't take his hand, not yet, but she mirrored his sway, shoulders moving with the faintest rhythm. For the first time in years, she wasn't hiding. Ethan matched her, one step, then another, both moving like shadows within the rain-lit garden. From across the glass house, Clara Anderson's breath caught. She pressed her fingers against her wineglass, disguising the crack in her composure. She had built her empire on steel and perfection, but nothing she had ever built had coaxed that expression from her daughter, the hint of a smile blooming fragile and alive beneath scars. She swallowed hard and turned away before anyone could notice. But Ethan noticed. He always did. The music carried softly through the glass house, no longer the background noise of polite society, but something more intimate, as if the quartet themselves had forgotten the crowd and were playing for a smaller, quieter audience. In the narrow fern-lined corridor, Ethan kept his movements simple. He had no illusions about leading a grand waltz. He wasn't there to impress anyone. Instead, he shifted into the rhythms that had once helped Amanda steady her failing body, the quiet art of making the unbearable bearable through breath and motion. He nodded to Sophia, then tapped his chest twice with his knuckles. 4 counts in, he murmured, voice low enough to be swallowed by the music. She hesitated, then inhaled. He held up his hand, palm outward. Hold for 4, her brow furrowed, but she obeyed. Then he exhaled in a slow 6-count stream. She mirrored him, the tremor in her shoulders easing. That's it, he said softly. Box breathing. Simple, steady. She let out an unexpected laugh, breath breaking against scar tissue that made smiling feel unnatural. It was awkward, imperfect, and achingly real. From there, he introduced motion, not a dance but a sway. Anchor your feet, he said, showing her how to keep her heels planted, toes tracing small arcs. Think of the ground as carrying you. He stepped to the left, then the right, no larger than the space of a breath. She followed, cautious at first. The scars had stolen much of her confidence, not just her beauty. The fire had damaged nerves on the right side of her face and shoulder, leaving parts numb, others burning with phantom pain. Yet as she shifted weight from one leg to the other, something stirred. A flicker of connection, an awareness of where her body ended and space began. Ethan saw it, the way her eyes widened slightly, as if surprised that she could still feel joy moving through her bones. He guided her further, placing a folded linen napkin over her shoulder before touching it. Through fabric only, he explained, giving her full control. Then he tapped gently, not in command but in rhythm. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. Pause. She closed her eyes, letting the pressure guide her. Proprioception, he told her quietly. Your body remembers more than you think. She breathed out, then let her arm drift upward. The movement was hesitant, then freer, a shadow of the dancer she had once been. That's good, Ethan whispered. You're not broken, just finding a new balance. The quartet's melody softened into something mournful, but Ethan layered his own rhythm over it. From his pocket he drew the small metronome, wound it until the faint vibration ticked against his palm, and then set it gently on the edge of the planter where Sophia could see. The pendulum swayed, not perfectly, sometimes faltering on its scarred gears, but steady enough to hold to. Sophia's lips curved upward and almost smiled, and then, without meaning to, she laughed when she stumbled a half step. The sound startled even her. It burst free, raw and bright, echoing faintly in the corridor. For years she had armored herself against laughter, afraid that joy would expose her vulnerability. But this laugh was different. It was survival disguised as music. Across the room, Clara Anderson froze mid-conversation. She had not heard that laugh in nearly a decade. Her colleagues prattled about market shares and hospital expansions, but the CEO's eyes locked on her daughter and the nameless waiter coaxing life from her body. Clara's throat tightened, though she forced her face into practiced composure. If anyone noticed, she could dismiss it as nothing. But inside, something broke, the brittle wall she had built around her guilt and shame. Sophia's breathing steadied. Her hands, once clenched tight, relaxed. She whispered, almost to herself, "It feels steady." The words cracked through the silence like sunlight through storm clouds. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with pride, but with relief. She had spoken it, named it. Steady was enough. He didn't reach for more. He stepped back slightly, giving her space, letting her own rhythm carry her. This wasn't about him. It was about her reclaiming ground she thought was gone forever. And then a small shadow appeared from behind a pot of orchids. Lily, unable to resist curiosity, had slipped past the catering staff. She swayed back and forth, her braids swinging, mimicking the steps she saw. Her eyes sparkled as she grinned at Sophia. "See? You're dancing," she whispered in a conspiratorial tone. Sophia startled, then giggled again, and for a moment the three of them, server, heiress, and child, moved together in the same rhythm. Not a ballroom spectacle, but a fragile sacred choreography of healing. Sophia's gaze shifted quickly toward the crowd beyond the ferns. Nobody else seemed to notice. Only her mother, watching from across the glass house, lips pressed tight against the emotion threatening to spill. Clara's coo leaned close, muttering about liability and optics, but Clara waved her off, her eyes never leaving her daughter's face. For once, the language of shareholders and donors felt hollow. What mattered was here, in the smallest of sways, in a laugh reborn under the rain-pattered glass roof. Ethan didn't push it further. He ended the sway with a simple nod, pocketed the metronome, and stepped back into the anonymity of his uniform. He lifted the tray once more, balancing it with practiced ease, as if nothing had happened. But Sophia's eyes followed him, a soft glow of something like gratitude flickering in their depths. For the first time in years, she had felt not broken, not pitied, but simply human, steady, imperfect, alive. The benefit ended with polite applause, the clinking of glasses, and promises scribbled on pledge cards. To the guests, the evening was a success. But for Clara Anderson, The image of her daughter swaying and laughing in the shadows haunted her long after the last limousine pulled away from the museum. She had built an empire on control over contracts, investors, and above all, narratives. Yet what she had witnessed was something she couldn't orchestrate. Sophia alive again. Not because of therapy her company had paid for, not because of her mother's relentless management, but because of a nameless waiter with calloused hands and a scarred metronome. Clara felt both grateful and threatened. Her chief operating officer, Victor Lang, leaned into her ear as staff cleared tables. "We can't have employees fraternizing with your daughter. Optics are dangerous. Liability." His tone carried the edge of someone who saw human connection as a breach of policy. Clara waved him off but filed his words away. Later that night, as she sat in her car beneath the rain-smeared glow of the city, she replayed Sophia's laugh in her mind. It was fragile and beautiful, and it cut sharper than any investor's critique. Something in her instinct said that Victor was hiding behind the language of liability to keep her blind. The next morning she acted. Instead of issuing reprimands, Clara called for an independent audit of all fire safety contracts tied to Anderson Holdings from 7 years ago. She told no one except her legal advisor, demanding absolute confidentiality. The order shocked her staff, but she carried it out quietly, disguising it as routine compliance. The past had teeth, and Clara wanted to know if the bite marks matched her own company. Meanwhile, Ethan slipped back into his routine. He worked shifts at the museum cafe during the day and served at the glass house in the evenings. His daughter Lily tagged along when school let out, often doing homework in a corner booth under the watchful eye of her aunt, who worked as a line cook. He never expected to see Sophia again. Yet one late afternoon she appeared in the empty practice studio adjacent to the museum's gallery space. She wore casual clothes, her hair tied back, scars unhidden. "You left too quickly," she said, voice tentative but steady. "I didn't get to say thank you." Ethan hesitated. He had already been warned subtly, through the narrowed eyes of supervisors, that proximity to Sophia was unwelcome. "It was nothing," he replied, "just a rhythm. Anyone could have shown you." But Sophia shook her head. "No," she said firmly. Anyone else would have looked away. She asked if he would show her more. He resisted at first, knowing the risk, but something in her eyes, part desperation, part determination, softened him. He agreed on one condition: only if it helps you. "Not for show," she nodded, relief plain in her smile. Their sessions were quiet, hidden from the glittering world outside. Ethan showed her grounding techniques, naming 5 green things in the room when panic rose, tapping the solace of her feet against the floor to remind her body it was safe. He taught her a simple progression of steps he called sway anchor sway, a microdance she could practice alone. Each time she grew steadier. And each time, Ethan saw flashes of the woman she might have been if fire had not stolen so much. But healing invited danger. During one of these sessions, a faint smell of smoke drifted in from the catering kitchen. Sophia froze mid-step, her chest tightening, eyes wide as her body spiraled back into memory. Ethan reacted instantly. He guided her to sit, pulled a scarf from a nearby chair, and pressed it gently against her arm to create safe tactile focus. "Look at me," he urged, keeping his voice calm. "Tell me 5 green things in this room," she gasped, eyes darting. "That plant. That painting. Your eyes." She broke into a sob, then laughed through it, tension releasing as her breath steadied. Clara, who had arrived unannounced at the studio door, witnessed the scene. For the first time, she saw her daughter in crisis not as a liability, but as a young woman still fighting for her life. And she saw the waiter who had stepped in with instinct and compassion where paid specialists had failed. That same week, Clara received the first report from the auditors. It was damning. Safety equipment purchased for the Riverside Theater, the one where Sophia had been burned, was counterfeit. Contracts had been funneled through shell companies tied to none other than Victor Lang, the Kui, who now whispered about liability in optics. The signature that had approved the purchase was hers, but the paperwork had been altered after submission. Victor had hidden the cost-cutting behind layers of technical jargon. Clara stared at the documents with numb hands. For years, she had blamed fate, chance, even Sophia's own bad luck. But here was the truth. Negligence had been engineered by someone she trusted. The next day, she approached Ethan privately. She offered him an envelope money, more than he made in months, to step away quietly, to protect both himself and Sophia from scandal. Ethan looked at the envelope, then at her. His voice was steady, the same steady that had saved Sophia. "I don't want your money. I want a room. A room at the community center where people like her can come for free. A place where rhythm can be recovery." Clara blinked, startled. She had expected greed, perhaps gratitude. She had not expected this. As she turned the envelope over in her hands, Sophia walked in, her cheeks flushed from the cold, Lily trailing behind her with a backpack. The child grinned, announcing in her small, bright voice, "Sophia's getting better at dancing." The words cut through the tension like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Clara's heart twisted. Her empire was cracking, but in that moment she saw something more important rising in its place. The winter sun filtered pale through the glass walls of the rooftop conservatory, illuminating orchids and palms that had been arranged for an unusual press conference. The Anderson Foundation had called reporters not for another fundraising gala, but for what Clara described as a reckoning. Rows of journalists, survivors, and staff filled the room. Clara stood at the podium, flanked by legal counsel, but without the armor of her usual corporate polish. Her voice carried the cool clarity of someone who had rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside. 7 years ago, the Riverside Theater fire scarred my daughter and dozens of others. The world was told it was a tragedy without fault. Today, I must tell you the truth. It was preventable. Safety contracts under Anderson Holdings were falsified, equipment was counterfeit, and oversight was corrupted. The responsibility is mine. I signed documents I should have examined more closely. For that, I accept full accountability. Gasps rippled across the room. Cameras flashed. Reporters scribbled furiously. Clara did not flinch. She continued, "Effective immediately, I will step aside as CEO until restitution is complete. Our Chief Operating Officer, Victor Lang, has been referred to the authorities, and we are creating an independent fund for victims, overseen by external experts, not our board. This is not charity, it is justice." The announcement shocked the city. Investors would panic, but in the room itself, the atmosphere shifted from scandal to something like awe. Clara's admission cracked open a system built on denial. Yet the most remarkable moment had not yet come. At the back of the conservatory, Sophia stepped forward, no scarf hiding her scars, her silver blue dress replaced by simple ivory cotton. Beside her stood Ethan and Lily, both in modest clothes that seemed almost out of place among the flashing cameras. Sophia raised her voice, trembling but determined. "I was taught to hide, to turn away from mirrors, from cameras, from eyes that judged me. But hiding kept me prisoner. Tonight, I want to show you something different." She turned to Ethan. He nodded, then placed the scarred metronome on a low stool. Its pendulum swayed, quiet but visible. Sophia extended her hand, not only to Ethan, but to anyone willing. "If you carry scars on your skin or inside, come dance with me." Silence held for a beat. Then a man in a firefighter's uniform, gray-haired and stiff with age, stepped forward. He bore burn marks across his forearms, relics of a rescue decades ago. A kitchen worker with a grafted cheek joined. A teenage boy with a prosthetic arm. Slowly the circle grew. They gathered in the center of the glass house, a ring of scarred bodies under the white light of day. Sophia took her place among them. Ethan began to play a new piece on the electric piano set discreetly against the wall. Steady as light, a melody that grew out of Amanda's lullaby but lifted higher, designed with a counterline so no one dancer needed to carry the rhythm alone. Each note invited movement, not performance. Shoulders swayed, feet shifted, breaths aligned. Sophia moved with them, not leading, not performing, but belonging. Tears filled her eyes as she saw Lily step shyly into the circle, clumsy steps fearless in their imperfection. The child clapped lightly to the metronome's tick, keeping time for all. Clara watched, hands clasped tight before her. The CEO, who had spent a career mastering balance sheets, now stood trembling at the sight of her daughter's balance restored through something no boardroom could calculate. She had expected anger from victims, outrage from the press. Instead, she saw compassion. Healing had become communal. Her own authority, once her shield, meant little compared to this fragile miracle unfolding in rhythm and breath. The reporters lowered their pens. Cameras kept rolling, but even the sharpest headline writer could not fully capture what was happening. In that circle, scars became less shameful and more like maps of survival. The metronome ticked on, imperfect yet steady, its scarred wood gleaming in the light. Sophia glanced at Ethan, gratitude unspoken but heavy in her gaze. He had not saved her. He had simply stood steady until she found her own strength. That was enough. When the final note faded, Sophia picked up the metronome, then placed it in the center of the circle, her voice carrying across the room. This doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. To every person who has been told to hide their scars. Today, we don't hide. Today, we move. Applause broke like a wave, not polite but fierce, many standing with tears on their cheeks. For Clara, the applause was not for her. And that, finally, was right. She had chosen truth over reputation, and her daughter had chosen courage over silence. The Anderson legacy would no longer be written in glass towers, but in the rhythm of survivors who danced, steady if not perfect. A year later, the rooftop glasshouse looked different. The orchids and palm trees still reached for the sky, but the space no longer belonged to gala tables and clinking glasses. Now it hosted classes for survivors, families, and anyone who needed a place to move without judgment. The program was called Rhythm for Recovery, and it had spread across 3 boroughs. In these spaces, scars were not hidden but honored. Mirrors were optional, music was live when possible, and perfection was forbidden. The only rule was steadiness, however small the step. Ethan had taken on a dual role, part-time pianist and instructor, part-time custodian of the very rooms he had dreamed into existence. His calloused hands set up folding chairs, tuned second-hand keyboards, and when the time came, guided participants through grounding exercises. He wasn't their savior. He was a companion who knew that breathing in 4, holding, and breathing out 6 could be the difference between panic and presence. Lily, now 8, had become the unofficial ambassador of the program. She scampered through studios, clapping to keep rhythm for newcomers, her joy disarming the most withdrawn participants. She told anyone who would listen that her daddy had a magic trick he could turn shaking into dancing. And when Sophia taught her class, Lily was often the first to volunteer, stumbling through moves with unpolished grace that made everyone laugh. Sophia had reclaimed her body. She taught a morning class called Move Like Morning, designed for slow awakenings. Participants stretched, swayed, and found confidence in the smallest gestures. Her scars remained, luminous under the studio lights, but she no longer flinched when eyes landed on them. She told her students, "These marks are proof I survived. They are not a mask. They are a map." The words resonated beyond the walls. Survivors of fires, veterans, people with prosthetics, and mothers marked by childbirth all found belonging there. The circle dance she had introduced at the press conference became a ritual. Each month, students gathered to sway together, metronome ticking at the center of the floor, a reminder that rhythm belonged to On. Clara Anderson had kept her word. She had stepped down as CEO, refusing to return until the Victim Compensation Fund was complete and independent safety oversight had been embedded in every project. Anderson Holdings changed its culture, not from the top, but from the cracks Clara allowed to form. She no longer measured her success in profits, but in the number of families who found safer housing, hospitals with improved protocols, and scholarships for survivors to pursue therapy and arts. Her reputation had been scarred, but like her daughter, she chose to live with scars rather than deny them. The coup, Victor Lang, was prosecuted for fraud and negligence. His downfall was swift and humiliating, but the real story people remembered was not his conviction, it was Sophia's circle of dancers, captured in photographs that spread across the world. Those images hung now in the studio, a firefighter with burns holding hands with a teenager in a prosthetic arm, Sophia's scarred face tilted toward the light, Ethan at the piano, and Lily grinning in the middle like a tiny conductor. One evening, after class ended, Sophia placed the battered metronome into Lily's hands. The wood was chipped, the brass dial worn smooth by decades of use. "This doesn't just belong to me anymore," Sophia told her. "It's yours. When your hands shake, use it. And when you meet someone else who's shaking, let them hold it too." Lily held the object like treasure. Her small fingers wound the key, listening to its imperfect tick with delight. "Not perfect," she said solemnly, echoing words she had heard from both her father and Sophia. Then she grinned. "But steady." Outside, rain tapped against the glass roof of the conservatory, steady and familiar. Ethan stood by the doorway, arms folded, watching his daughter cradle the metronome. His chest swelled with something more lasting than pride. He had not given Sophia her life back. She had reclaimed it herself. He had not transformed Clara. She had chosen truth. But he had been steady. And sometimes, steadiness was enough to change the course of everything. The students trickled out into the night, their laughter echoing down the museum steps. Sophia lingered by the piano. "Do you ever miss the stage?" she asked Ethan. He shook his head, smiling. "This is my stage now." He pressed a key, soft and deliberate, as Lily clicked the metronome in time. 3 rhythms blended: father, daughter, survivor woven together under a roof that once housed shame but now sheltered healing. It was not perfect. It was never meant to be. But it was steady, and that steadiness had built something stronger than legacy, a community. And in that community, scars were not secrets, rhythm was not performance, and family meant anyone who learned to keep time with another heartbeat. Scars do not make us less, they remind us that we survived. Ethan's steady hands, Sophia's courage to step into the circle, and Clara's choice to face the truth show us that healing isn't about perfection. It's about presence, rhythm, and the families we build when we choose compassion over fear. What began as a single dad's quiet act of kindness became a movement that gave hundreds permission to be seen, scars and all. And maybe that's the lesson we all need. You don't have to be perfect, you just have to be steady for someone else. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Soul Stirring Tales. Let us know in the comments what steadiness means to you, because your story might just be the rhythm someone else needs.